All right. Welcome to our June 11th, 11/11. We are talking about living our values this month. Welcome, Sheila. So glad you're
Thank
here.
you. Glad to be here.
We, we have these monthly conversations on the 11th of every month at 11 a.m. to
Mhm.
talk about what it means to live our values because it is not always obvious what that means. We talk about values. In fact, my daughter graduated on Friday, and values were mentioned several times in different commencement speeches and things like that. But guess what? It was done very generally. They
Mhm.
said, like, oh, I did my values or this value or that value, but they didn't say what those values were or how they
Um,
actually were lived. And I find that to be very true. People say the word values a lot, and then we're expected to know what that means for each of us. And unfortunately, it's very different for each of us and very much the same for a lot of us. So
mhm.
it's not that there's a right or wrong or a binary definition of what a value is or isn't, but it's more of making sure that we have a clear understanding of what it means when we say values.
Right, right, absolutely. Yeah. And actually to just not give lip service to it, but to really kind of feel into that. That's kind of like when you're living the values, and it's kind of important to make a declaration, at least if not publicly, privately declare what they are and be clear about what they are. Because that's not always, it's like what, like we always talk about, what values, are they the values that you were given, the values that your parents gave to you, the values that you picked up from other places? Have you really stopped to examine what is meaningful for you? I mean, there's so many different ways to like say that values are important, but then not to go deeper.
Absolutely. And I liked what you said. It's not just lip service. I do find
Mhm.
that the conversation around values is very much lip service, or there's a preconceived idea of what those values are, right? Like this has to be this value or that value. And
Mhm.
people put that on you. So there's
Mhm.
these, it's in a world of a lot of vagueness and assumptions, as opposed to what we do here, which is shake that all up
Mhm.
and get and go through an inquiry-based process to really understand what our core values are. So I think this is a good time to say how we define core values and what they mean to us in the work
Absolutely.
that we do, which is, and I like to say this just to remind myself every month too, right? Just like, what are core values? But core values are single words or short phrases that reflect what is most important to us, kind of that deepest part of ourselves. It connects us to that part of ourselves that is divine, that is our highest and best self. It reminds us of what we really care about, no matter what's going on around us.
Mhm.
And in that way, they bridge for us. They become a bridge. So our core values bridge us to remind to ourselves to say, hey, right, okay, this is what's most important to you. At the same time, they bridge us to other people and what's happening out in the world. So we're not just isolating in ourselves, but we're also out and caring for other people and connecting to others. So they're a great connector in that way, which is a part of what we're going to talk about today as well.
Mhm. Yes, yes. And
Yeah.
what is the topic for today?
So the topic for today is we're talking about showing up.
Right.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about showing up and how do we show up for others and show up for ourselves at the same time. Because I'm someone who learned how to please others, people please, be there for others, be responsible for others, but it was really at the expense of taking care of myself. At the same time, I also can see there are times in my life where as I was learning to care for myself, the focus was so on myself that it was hard to be caring for somebody else in that way.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
So how do we find the motivation to show up even when we're tired, even when we don't want to, for other people and for ourselves at the same time, and hold that dynamic duality that is so key, I think, to moving our world forward in what we're being called to do right now.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're talking about showing up, even in all the many ways that that can happen. So yeah.
It's yeah, always timely. I mean, all the topics are always timely. And yeah, showing up is pretty broad in a lot of ways because it does
Mhm.
encompass, like you said, so much. It encompasses showing up for yourself, just showing up in general, showing up for yourself, showing up for your community, showing up for whatever,
Mhm.
which is that act of showing up and what that looks like and feels like and how you express that. And yeah, I thought about that this morning too, about the showing up part. And I thought, with the values that connect with that, and there's so many, but I think that the one that really struck me this morning was the lead with compassion, because
Mm.
for me, that value is around having this openness and this curiosity and this sense of, okay, I don't really know what it's like to be somebody else, but I know what it's like to have these different experiences. And I can then say, okay, I can then feel into how somebody might be experiencing something that's very different from me, particularly when they have a different viewpoint or a different perspective
Right.
and they're operating from a different lens. It's like, okay, I can get to the reason when I show up with compassion, when I lead with compassion, I can get closer to an understanding and an acceptance that, oh, I think this is the lens through which they're looking at things. And from this perspective, I can see how this
Right.
can be this way. It makes me less judgmental. It makes
Mhm.
me less inclined to want to change things or to have things be the way I think they should be. Because
Mhm.
that's always the thing, it's life is the way it is, right? So
Right.
people are, and I always have the sense that people are doing the best that they can, even though it may not look great. Even for
Fair
me,
enough.
there are times when what I'm doing, the best that I'm doing, does not look like so exquisite. It's like, oh my
Yeah,
goodness,
you're here.
it's not great at all. However, and this is how I also lead with compassion with myself too, and show up for myself. Because there are some days, and there have been some days recently when I've just been, at the end of the day, I've been kind of frustrated with myself. It's like, oh, I just am not super happy about how this day went or what progress I did or didn't make or whatever else is going on, right? So it's like, okay. And a little bit impatient
Mm.
with my progress, impatient with my growth, impatient with the things that I want for myself. And then when I can lead with compassion with myself, I can recognize that, all of this takes time and I am in a constant state of unlearning things. This is what
Right.
these days, it's all about unlearning so much crap that I learned early on and I've taken on as being this part of myself, or the way that I think the biggest thing for me is the parts of me that I'm not really conscious of, that are operating subconsciously. When I see the manifestation of that, and it's like, God, what the heck is going on? And then I can be a little bit more compassionate with myself and say, you know what, it's taken a long time for you to, you did these things, or you were this particular way because it served you
Right.
some point. And now it
Right.
may not be serving you. So this is like information. This is an opportunity. So it's like every day then becomes like, all right, it's a reset.
Right.
Reset. And having that compassion helps me to not beat myself up, or to be like,
Yeah.
spend time dwelling on that and to like go down that spiral of, oh my God, all these other things, but just to like, all right, reboot. All right, today. All right, let's try it again today.
Right.
Let's try it again today. I
Opportunities to
find that
move.
really helpful.
Yeah. That's beautiful because you talked about how lead with compassion, your value works both ways. It works
Mhm.
towards yourself and towards how you interact with others. And I noticed it initially started with others, right? Your lead with
Mhm.
compassion, your
Mhm.
tendency, and I think mine too, is to care for others first. And then, oh yeah, I'm going to apply this to myself. Lead with
Yes.
compassion towards myself, and
Yes.
how powerful that is
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
way. And when we work, and that's the beauty of the values, is that they are like, you know, a bridge that goes both ways, so that they remind you so you don't get burnt out in that way, or fall into that other trap of the unconscious, just focusing on oneself in that way too. That can do that. And yes, when we see things in ourselves that no longer serve us, gosh, I mean, how do we do that with compassion? Keep that, because that is not, and like you said, everyone's doing the best they can for the most part, or in the moment, you know. I've often been like, can't they do any better? But I do the same for myself. Can't I do any better? And sometimes the answer is no, this is the best I can do. And can I show up anyway? And I show up here imperfectly. And whether that's here on Zoom or right.
Oh yeah.
In a relationship, or in my house, how it's maintained or not, it doesn't always look or is the way that it is. Or even you know, having all the events for the graduation and things like that. So it's like it's all of that, doing our best, but knowing who we are in that. It's not an excuse, like I did, you know, it's the best I could do. Sorry. I've heard that too, as a defense, right?
Right. An excuse. It's kind of an excuse. It's like, well, yeah, or you know, this is yeah, this is all that I am, or I am what I am, or any of those kinds of things that are just like easy ways of just like blowing it off and saying, I'm not going to put any effort toward shifting in any way, or I'm not going to bring any consciousness to it. This is like, this is what it is. And even in the face of it not working, just continuing to just say, oh, I'm doing my best. You know, it's different from that. It really is around.
It is.
I think that the moment in front of you always gives you information about what's working and what's not working.
Right.
And if you're willing to look at it, then it's like right there in front of you. It's like, it's okay. There's some things that can shift.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there is that self-awareness of knowing when is, I'll do the best that I can, a defense mechanism, or a blow, like I think you said blow off, or kind of like a bypass ability, rather than I know I'm doing the best I can, where there's acceptance in that. There's no haste. There's no rushing. There may even be some sadness. I have had that. And if I'm doing the best I can and it still doesn't feel like I want it to.
Right. And then and for me, that's also where forgiveness comes in. You know, it's this thing around just allowing my imperfections to be without that judgment that it needs to be different. Because it's kind of like, if it was different, it would be different. If, you know, it is what it is, right? So it's like, no, it's not that thing that I want. This is what it is right now. And to just forgive myself for just being like fallible human on the journey, and not always getting it right, not always showing up in my best way, you know. And it's like, okay,
perfectly imperfect, that we like to say in my household. Yeah.
Yes.
Which does one of your values have? Is forgiveness one of your values, or is it?
It is not listed as one of my values, but it is. I mean, it's in there so much. It's in the Lead with Compassion. It's in, yeah, Activate Healing and Wellbeing. There's forgiveness in there.
Yes,
and it's just, yeah, it's forgiveness is such a huge piece for me, because that's something that I learned, really learned well in my 50s, I think. Had to learn it, and had to learn it very in a profound way. And so understanding how powerful it is for me to be in a position of forgiving others, forgiving myself, has just been a game changer. So it's like always underpinning things. It's like, okay, sometimes it's like, okay, I forgive myself. I'm going to apply some forgiveness now to this situation. And it makes a huge difference.
Do you think forgiveness is one of those words that's in all of your values, or is it embedded in only in certain ones?
I imagine that if I thought about it enough, it probably could. Like, one of my values is invite beauty into every moment. And so where would the forgiveness fit into that? That's around acceptance, and like, just like my notion of what things are. It's like, okay, it's like letting go and surrendering and knowing that even when it looks really crappy or I'm having to struggle a little bit to find what's beautiful about this, I can forgive my need for there to be something different. I can forgive and kind of just go with what is. So it's like forgiveness, acceptance are tied in there together.
Mhm.
And
Yes,
I
I
think
can
that
see
they
that.
dance really well together because it's around just accepting, like when something happens, like when somebody has betrayed you, for instance, the biggest thing is around, or oftentimes it's around, I can't believe this happened, right? This should not have happened. It should not have
Right.
happened this way, right? But the reality is it did happen that way, right? So there's an element of acceptance that I think is like one of the first steps toward forgiveness for me that I have found is the acceptance, because with the acceptance, it's like, okay, here we are. This is the way it is. And so I'm just going to accept that. And then I can allow for everything else and start to forgive. It's like, yeah, that it didn't turn out the way in my mind it should be. And that's okay. I mean, that's the reality of it. So there's kind of a piece in that. So I guess
Yes.
they're tied in together.
Yeah. Because we've said here before, right? There are certain words that fall into all of our values or aspects,
Right. Like love,
like
like
love,
courage.
courage, and
Right.
those are the two that come to mind the most. And I'm curious,
They're just in
forgiveness is
everything,
in there
in
too.
everything. And I would probably say acceptance for me is probably one of those that's in everything.
Yeah. I think they're tied to forgiveness because what I would
Mm-hmm.
say is one of the key aspects to living your values. And then that's what we're talking about. These are the words that are part of living our values, right? Love, courage, acceptance, and forgiveness. They can also be someone's values too, but they're in all of our values that we have seen, or we can see aspects of them in our definitions. But forgiveness in not always living up to our values, right?
That too.
Right. So
Totally.
flourish is one of my values, and accepting when it's not growing, I'm not blooming or flourishing. I can be in forgiveness of that. And I think about the plants growing in my yard and the little, the strawberries that are growing and the snap peas that I'm talking to, and they're doing so
Oh, that's
well
so fantastic. I
in
love
the
that.
garden, right? And they're flourishing. And I get so excited when I see the little bits of arugula coming up through the dirt, right? And so that's fun and it's exciting and it's flourishing. But if they don't grow, like I'm not going to punish them like I would myself for not doing something, right? Or my child. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the for self-forgiveness in particular for thinking I didn't measure up or show up the best way I was supposed to, or look a certain way, or do a certain thing, or perform, or it's usually on an external basis, often,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes on an internal one too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that forgiveness, self-acceptance, acceptance aspect of it is really, really key, because it's not about living our values in some kind of a perfect way. It's really about being in the dynamic intentionality
Mm-hmm.
of living our values.
Mm-hmm.
So forgiveness becomes a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, it's more and more about wrong thinking. It's around expanding the way that I think about things, right?
Mhm.
And that is always helpful. So I can forgive myself for having thought about things in a certain way, and that causing me pain and suffering, because
Mhm.
that was my viewpoint, right? That's the way that I saw things. And the more that I expand that notion of how things ought to be,
Right.
the limitations of what they are, and see them from a broader vantage point, the more that it's like, when I think about that example of flourishing, part of the only way that your strawberries and your snap peas and arugula can flourish is that time that they spent underneath the soil, right? So that part is valuable. It's not their full, like they have within them the full potential,
Right.
right? Like become the beautiful arugula that's like these beautiful leaves that are like ready for ripe for picking, right?
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
the whole process is important, right? So it's like a lot of times I know for myself as well, I get into the notion that it's like looking at the summertime, the bloom, right? The bloom is being all magical and all important. And then coming to like really respect and understand that process, because I look at nature a
Yes.
lot, right? Just like you do, of how all of that, tending to the soil, the part that is not, that's underneath the soil, is as important to that plant becoming what it needs to be, and bearing fruit as the actual fruit itself, because without
Mhm.
it, it doesn't happen. So that's where the forgiveness for me comes in, but it's around the way that I thought about it for myself. So it's like I'm beating myself up for not being in bloom mode all the time. Well,
Mhm.
I can't be in bloom mode all the time. It's impossible. Nature never works that way, right? So when I look at it, I see evidence to the contrary, but I'm expecting myself to be in this place of
Exactly.
constant bloom. And there's a lot of pressure just in general, I think, in society for that to be the case too. It's like this, the toxic positivity and all the things, and it's like, oh, it's like all of this. It's like there's people want the coin, but they only want the heads.
Right.
They don't
Yeah.
want the tails, but it's attached, right? So it's like with all the other, with the sweet comes the bitter, right? With it, there's the duality. There's the part that's still going to be there, even if you're not willing to look at it and to like brush it away and pretend that it doesn't exist. So it's like that part of like being in a state of like what feels like torpor or dormancy or whatever else, in preparation for this blooming, is as valuable and is as important as the other. And so these are the things that I keep like just trying to remind myself of, because then I can say, okay, when I think about it from a different vantage point, then I am, you know,
Yeah.
moving forward, even though it doesn't look like it, it doesn't look like it, but there's something happening, right? That I can't see, but I know is in process, right? So there's like a
Absolutely.
different level.
Right. And that's why
Yeah.
showing up looks so different all the time,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Showing up to acknowledge what's happening, to be in acceptance when all you see is the dirt and you don't see the bloom, right? That is the hardest time to show up,
Ooh, wow. Yes, absolutely.
right?
Yes.
Like that
Yes.
is really hard to show up. And that's, that's that faith, really. Faith.
Help me. Mhm,
That's
mhm.
the faith where
Oh, yeah.
where when we have to show up when it doesn't look like we think it is supposed to look, and show up anyway, again and again.
Mhm,
And that's,
mhm.
where the values can become really helpful. I call that intuitive motivation, because it's reminding us what really motivates us. So which one of your values do you think you rely on in that moment to help motivate you to show up when you can't see? Is there one that comes to mind?
Um, I'm gonna I constantly go back to the be present value,
Mm,
because without getting too like deep into this, I think that um whenever I'm present, and I'm aware, I'm in the moment, I'm not in my head thinking about, you know, like projecting into the future or remembering and
mhm,
worrying about the past. When I'm in the moment, my orientation is always that there's no problem in the moment. There's events,
mhm.
there's things that are happening that I can respond to, but there's no problem in the moment. The problem is either in my recollection of the past, or what I think is going to happen or not
Yes.
happen in the future. So for me, when I anchor in the moment with my sensations, with just always with my sensations and just my awareness, and become a little bit like let the mind go a little bit, that's the point in which the freedom comes for me to be able to uh self-correct, to like say, okay, and take this breath, and what's the inspired action, what's the next thing,
Mm, yeah.
what's what do I need, what feels right, right now? What would, just move me forward? It might be walking, it might be stretching, it might be grabbing something. It could be any number of things. Might be like reading something or whatever, but it's like, this is, if I can focus on this moment right now, I can then take care of myself and be more in a state of, yeah, just that wonderful sense of like, all right, life is okay. Life is okay as it is. And
Right.
that I find just extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah.
So that's a value I rely on heavily.
To be present. Right.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes just over and over again, because it just really does calm. It gives me calm. It gives me access to something better, my intuition, next steps, yeah, calm nervous system, all that.
Right. Because without that, we can't show up really. We could
Exactly.
be, there, but that's different than showing up.
Right, because if I'm in my head, I can't really show up.
Mm-mm.
I can't show up very well.
Mm-mm.
Because I'm either thinking about what needs to be done or what might happen or what I want to happen and all these other things, or thinking about stuff in the past. But when I really show up for myself, I'm like anchored in this moment with
Right.
all these senses.
Yeah.
So that one's been super powerful for me.
Yeah.
What about for you?
So for me, I think it's a few different values, but one that comes to mind is gratitude and grace. That's the one that comes to mind. The gratitude helps me kind of shift into where I can see and appreciate what's in front of me.
Yes.
And shift, because I am a problem solver by nature. I will focus only on, in an attempt to keep myself safe, probably. And I'm an Enneagram 6, so who knows, born, nurture, nature, a little bit of both, probably. But that's definitely my wiring. So shifting into a state of gratitude in a meaningful way is really helpful. And grace. It's not just in my thinking. It has to be understanding that is something greater than myself. There's something more powerful. There's the divine, the universe, and the grace of I don't have to do it all. Right? Because that's an old belief that is not true, but came from a very young age, having to take care of myself when I wasn't able to. So it's basically trauma-based thinking, but the grace is the antidote for that. The loving grace.
And it's like those, using the values in the context of this, like how do I actually move into that state of showing up for myself and the self-care. It's like really they provide a pause. They provide this really amazing pause.
Yeah.
Then something else can take over. So it's like my wisdom, my intuitive wisdom can take over.
Right.
And I can be more available to things and possibilities, because I'm not like running a script where I'm beating up on myself or thinking things have to be a certain way, right? So it's like that pause that I experience when I anchor in the present moment, and for you, getting into gratitude and grace, which is also anchoring into the present moment. It's like
right.
bounty that I have. Look at how I'm blessed. Look at what all the things that you're grateful for. And that's true for me in that experience too, because like that shows up too. But it's so nice to be able to use that to then just kind of show up in a different way. It's like, okay, now I'm here as a loving, more compassionate, more forgiving, more accepting presence versus my judge, the part of me that wants to judge, the part of me that wants to gets into all of that. I can step away from that and okay, breathe. And so it's really exciting. It's actually very exciting because the gratitude does come up. Invariably, the gratitude comes up, and I'm just so grateful. It's like, I always think about these, like, these are the best years of my, no matter what's happening, these are the best years of my life. Like, this
I
is the
feel the
best
same
time of
way.
my life. It's like, wow, I mean, there's something to really be celebrated and appreciated about that.
Yeah.
So, and when I can pause enough to remember that,
Yep.
then
In the
there's
pause.
more
Yeah.
flow. There's more flow. There's more ease and flow.
Right. And you're right. The values provide that pause. Remind us of our highest self, our best self that makes it better and better. Because when we get into the automatic and the have tos, the musts, the duty, all of those things, and come from that place, it's really hard not to just want to bail out.
Right. It's that subconscious script, it's that repeat, that record on repeat. It's not always even, we're not always even aware, at least I'm definitely not always aware of it. I wish I wish I were, but then I see evidence of it. And so when I can catch it, like do something about it, but it's like, it just like started to just like takes over, right? That operating system takes over.
And when I'm tired, like I am now, even from good things, like hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, those things will start to creep in. The negativity, those thoughts, those old tapes come in. And so, yeah, I want to blow things off then. And what I found is the tool of my values help me not do that. Because in the end, it becomes self-sabotaging. It becomes a vicious cycle, right? I exhaust myself, so I can't show up, so I can't do it. So I have to get all going and overdo. And then it's just a vicious overdo, exertion, exhaustion cycle. And that could be emotional, physical, work related. It could be any overgiving, overworking, burnout, all of those kinds of things fall into that bucket. And the values provide that pause so it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it is just,
It stops.
That's the brilliant thing about the values. It really is, because it's just like, there's so many opportunities throughout the day to really reconnect with them, especially when there are challenges, opportunity, because it's like, it's easy to like, oh, when things are going great, it's like, oh, it was good. Oh, this is so wonderful. It's not, I don't really think about my values as much as when I feel challenged by something.
Yeah.
Then I'm much more aware of them and much more inclined to like see where, okay, let me recalibrate this way.
It's funny. For me, it's both. Even when things are going well, I have anxiety around that, right? Okay. Like this is a weekend of celebration, graduation, parties. My mom's visiting. Oh my God, I have to dig deeper almost to connect to my values, to stay grounded and not overexert myself in vicious cycle.
Right. All the habits of ways.
The old habits. Yeah. Or when I'm growing and expanding, I can have a lot of anxiety about the growth of expansion. And so for me, and when things are really challenging, I'm almost more comfortable with challenge.
Well, as a problem solver, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So I'm the Enneagram 6. There you go. Yeah. I have all the things prepared. So for me, that's also a challenge, to be in that faith of expansion when things are actually going well. And so pausing to lean on the values to show up for that too, or else it becomes another self-sabotage mechanism. So it slows it down. The values kind of help ground me into the present moment so that I can show up for the things that I want to show up for, but then start to feel like I can't. And like we started the conversation too, not show up with a shell of a person, like being just, looking good, looking great on the outside, doing all the right things, but internally collapsing, which is that exhaustion piece.
Right. Which is like giving from that cup that's empty, the cup that's
right,
that needs to be filled.
Right. Putting the oxygen mask on ourselves first. But then not just breathing the oxygen and forgetting everybody else. I see a little bit of too much of that too going on, you know, like, okay, we do that only to help the others.
Yeah. And as you mentioned before, you said that you had to go from one extreme to the other. Like there's this place of like when showing up for yourself feels new and it's not as familiar, then the emphasis is on doing that because there's the fear of, oh, this can go away. Like
Right.
I don't have this in place. I need to hold on to this. And so I need to like really like put myself first and show up for myself all the time first. And it's not, and it might be that other things get neglected, but that's like part of that, that coming to the middle, right? That's
Right.
so important, for each of us to be able to find that middle ground. Um, yeah. And sometimes that's necessary, because especially if you've been an overgiver, like I'm an overgiver and I'm a person who gives a lot. And just finding that having the boundaries, having established the boundaries and just, because you have the boundaries where people are always poking to see whether they can, where they can permeate those boundaries, right? And so it's not like you have the boundaries and then that's it, right? It's like they get tested, right? And so
Yeah.
um so just being able to recognize that right now I really need to, the focus needs to be on me having, maintaining my boundaries in a way that feels helpful and authentic and it is nourishing and all of these other things becomes more important. So it's like, yeah, we can shift into like giving, but then there's also the time to
Right.
balance that with, okay, so now what do I need? Because it's like giving from that place of emptiness, from that place of I don't have a whole lot. Like it's
Right.
the well is drying up or it's dry, but I'm still trying to show up and give. That becomes not only the quality of that giving really suffers both for you and the other person
Right. Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. It's
Because then the resentment comes, then the
yeah.
other things come, then the fatigue, then all the other stuff shows up, and it's like, it's time to like show up for myself. It's time for me to take that
Right.
time and
Yeah. And hold those boundaries
Mhm.
and and with practice it becomes gentler. I find in the beginning when I was learning to set boundaries, it was like
Oh,
white knuckling it to
oh
hold
yeah. Oh yeah.
and now I can do it with more confidence and
Right.
calm
Mhm.
and just that inner strength of knowing,
Mhm.
and that comes with, I think, wisdom and age a little bit. It's very different setting a boundary in your 20 when no one ever honored your boundaries than 55.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. Uh-huh. Yeah.
After practicing. It's all a practice, I believe. And and the values help me remember how important it is to do that
Mhm. Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that I can show up for myself
Mhm.
and others and do it. There's just I don't believe there's anything called balance. We talk about harmony here, like there's a harmony in showing up for self and others.
Oh my goodness, yes, absolutely.
Can't really
Absolutely.
balance it. It doesn't, I find.
Right. Yeah, I understand that balance is a word that's kind of like, yeah, it's not like the scales. It's like you're not oh,
Right.
here, it's not quite like that. But it
No.
is in something that just feels in integrity. So it feels
Mhm.
fluid, but it's also there's enough for you. Like you're not putting yourself last or taking the scraps or any of those other things. It's like just just taking care of yourself, just
Right.
recognizing that that's okay, valuing that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we, here we talk about having a set of core values, right? So there's an intentionality to that set. So the
Mhm.
set also gives us ideas of how to show up differently in our life, which is why it's so important to think about it from the different points of view of our values. There's just 7 different ways of thinking about how we could show up for something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ourself-
Yeah.
in ourself and others in all those ways.
hmm hmm
So each of the values has both in it, which I think is, we sometimes don't really realize.
I thought about a different, I just, for some reason, I just thought about another way of showing up. I've been reading something that reminds me about just how when we come into a situation, we come with a lot of preconceived ideas, especially with people that we know and love,
Mm-hmm.
familiar with, and we just have this kind of reflexive way of engaging with them and kind of anticipate this is how they're going to respond. And it's an easy kind of bypass. It's a shortcut, right? Because it's easy to like, oh, to kind of predict what's going to happen here, right? I'm going to come, I'm going to show up this way and they're going to show up this way. And I've really been noticing how, as I have consciously, like with one person in particular, been shifting that to like be just more open and like not like consciously like showing up with this, oh, I don't know how to describe it. I want to say curiosity in beginner's mind. It's kind of like, what would it, let me just like give this person the benefit of the doubt that they are growing, and let me see the evidence of that. Let me just see them through fresh eyes, right?
Right.
And I've been loving what it's like to see the people that I know and I have a history with, to see them with fresh eyes. Because what it is inviting is inviting more room for both of us to show up differently.
Right.
For me to choose like a different way, like I might like take more risks. Oh, I might be a little bit more vulnerable here because it's like, okay, I am feeling confident and safe, and I don't have to protect myself or think about what happened in the past or whatever else. Or I'm gonna like, yeah, I'm just gonna take the risk and try this or say this or do this. And it's just been amazing because it's like it's just opening, it feels like it's just this opening for both of us to really kind of see each other differently and respond to each other differently.
Yeah,
And
that's beautiful.
that's another way of showing up. It's like, how do you show up first? How do you show up in an interaction? Is it with the same set of beliefs about somebody, or is it with a freshness that you can like
Right.
take? Because it's like, as I'm growing, I can't see other people's growth unless they tell me about it, or I look to see what's
Right.
different.
And it sounds to me like it's also part of your lead with compassion. Like it's a way of that you're expressing your lead with compassion
Yeah,
in
it is
this,
part of that.
in a new, in a with this new information that you're learning or reading, right? Like it's a piece of that.
Mhm. And they have the opportunity to continue to grow and flourish in the same way that I expect to continue to grow and flourish.
Right.
It's like, oh, so what's there?
And I mean, I've had this experience this weekend even where I will have more of a beginner's mind, be more open, be more gentle, and still have some old reactions and surprise myself. And I'm still doing the best I can. Like
Oh,
really in that moment going, gosh, I really want to do it differently. There's some things here I don't fully understand. There's dynamic things happening and I don't quite get it.
right. And again, now we come all the way back to forgiveness and the grace,
Yeah.
because this is like, none of this just happens. It's like, it's not like you can just envision it and then there it is, right?
Right.
This is practice. This is
That's why I
like
like that
coming
practice.
right back to it again and again and again, and learning and unlearning. So it's like it doesn't just happen overnight. So it's like the opportunity for me is to keep like seeing, like if I have like what you're saying, you have a reaction to something that's like the same damn reaction. It's like, I want to do it differently, right? And then it's like, you just have moments where you can just, okay, the next time maybe I'll be able to catch it quicker, or there'll be something different, or I'll see these signs of this reaction coming. But for now, this is the best that I can do, because it's like, this is like, the
Right.
dance that I'm in
It's the
with this.
dance, right? Or I can have that experience of seeing myself going, oh wow, that's so interesting. Right? Like I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. But okay. And I can catch it in a moment and acknowledge it with the other person I'm with sometimes and say, I don't have any, just like, wow, that came out funny, or that's not you. I'm just working through something, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
or I have this thing like when my kids were little, right, and I'm trying to back out of the driveway, or paying attention when I'm driving or something, and the questions start coming towards me, and I had to teach my children, not to talk to me at certain points when there was something going on the road, or things that were happening, or when I was backing up, things where I was really needing to pay attention to, because we don't always have the social awareness of what's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's a piece of that too, right? Because I'll
Right.
snap in that moment. It's not meant to shut anyone down or not hear what they have to say that's important, but it's being able to communicate my need, right? Take care of myself, show up for myself, so for the safety of my car, right? For what I need, at the same time, honoring that they have something they want to say that's important, but do it in a way that's not going to make them, shut them down and be rude, because I could do that too.
We don't get this perfectly. We just don't get it
Did that
perfectly.
make sense what I was just saying?
And yeah, we just don't, it totally makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like, sometimes your intention is different than how it might come across, right?
Yeah.
So it's like recognizing both things. And my intent is to like really like seize this moment and like focus. And the way that I did it, I could have done it differently, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just like kind of snappy and it just shuts things down. So it's like, okay, knowing that, like then you have this conversation and you teach them, okay, when mommy's backing up, this is like hold your questions or whatever else, right? So that they understand that it's like this is urgency here, right? So it's like, I mean, but this is all about that's a beautiful way to show up, is to acknowledge what you need in the situation, you
Right.
know, from other people, and acknowledge what you need for yourself in that situation.
Right.
And that's a beautiful way to show up for yourself too. And it, it's not going to be perfect. Oh my God, it's not going
No, not at all.
to
But
be, but there's learning.
there's
There's
learning in there.
opportunity, there's learning.
And I think with like the kids situation, that one situation, like it's helpful for them to know what was going on, like why I was,
Right,
because they'll think it's them, and it wasn't their question. There wasn't anything wrong with
right,
what they
exactly.
were
Like,
doing.
oh, yeah,
Thinking.
when you're driving,
Yeah.
it's not just like sitting there as a passenger looking out the window. There are things that are responsible acts that you have to take, right? So it's like it requires something different, right? There's
Right.
like a responsibility, and then yes,
Yeah.
it's just
And
learning.
to come full circle, my daughter's learning how to drive right now. She takes her test at the end of the month, driving test. And so we were talking about something, and she's like, Mom, I cannot talk about, I was like a relationship situation thing right now. And so she was able to articulate it back to me,
Right, and remind you as well. It's like,
remind me
oh,
what I was
yeah,
teaching
yeah.
her.
Right. Yeah. This is a different situation for me. This is routine. I don't have to like give it so much mental energy, but for her, all mental energy and focus needs to be on learning this
Right.
thing.
So it's like, yeah, but how much we make judgments about others, about showing up, or how somebody is based on misinformation or confusion, or not even the clarity of talking about what's actually really happening in the
Mhm,
situation.
mhm, mhm.
So,
Absolutely. Yes.
which is
Yeah.
gets back to that clarity, that understanding, the pause, and the intentionality of knowing where we're coming from, so that we can clean up anything if we need to, show up the best we can, and when we can't, talk about it
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Absolutely.
with
Yeah.
forgiveness and self-acceptance, acceptance of self
All of
and
the
others,
above.
forgiveness of
All,
self and others,
all of the above, because yes. Yeah. Yeah. And grace.
and grace.
And grace, yeah. These are like the underpinning ones, as I think about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that acceptance, the love, the courage, the grace, the gratitude, forgiveness, all of these things are just like interwoven into so many different things. It's so many different of my values, different values,
yeah,
you know. And awareness. That's the other one. Awareness is really big,
so
so like Yeah, all of this is like, these are just moments, and I'm always just so grateful for the moment to continue to grow, and the progress that I've made. It's like, oh my God, it's like when I think about where I was, years ago and where I am now, it's like light years away. And there's so much more, right? I always feel like there's so much more possibility, but it's not like from a place of dissatisfaction or wanting to be anywhere else. It's just this awareness that there, the ability to grow and expand is endless, and this is part of the journey of life. And there's something really joyful about not knowing what it's going to look like 5 years from now, but just knowing that as I stay on this trajectory, it's going to just be astounding and amazing to me. Even it's like,
Yeah.
wow, look at where you've come, and still at the same time accepting and appreciating and loving this place, and being able to show up for myself in this time and space, and just feel really good about it, and know
Right.
that there's like more, but not in a needy way, but just in a kind of excited, like, wow, awesome, kind of curious way. It's like, well,
Right.
what's going to happen next?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that gets right to the point of showing up, right? You're talking about showing up for your life
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
this way by being present, by doing all the things that you're doing. It's like, oh yeah, I'm ready. I'm
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Showing
Yeah.
up.
It's such a good feeling. It's such a good feeling. And then just bringing this full circle, it's because of the values
Right.
that allow for that, the recognition of the values. It's anchoring in, relying on them, using them as the guideposts, using them as the bridge, all of those things to help with this in the
Right.
context of showing up for myself and others.
Right. Yeah. That's a perfect place to pause the conversation. Well, next month, hopefully sooner, but we're here next month
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah.
and continue
So,
to show up. And
mm-hmm.
yeah. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.